Hey, welcome back. In this section, we're going to look at editing, both audio and MIDI. And rather than just mechanically paw through all of the menus and toolboxes, which are largely self-explanatory anyway, I'm going to try to attack this from a little different angle, and we'll look at half a dozen or so specific editing scenarios. Now, editing can take up a couple of different roles. It can be corrective, where you're fixing a specific problem. It can be editorial, where you're changing things to help either you or your client make better or different decisions. And it can be creative, where you're using these tools to take the performance and shape it or amend it somehow. So let's jump in with audio. And the first scenario that I've got here is a basic corrective editing situation. And that is the bane to everybody's existence, the plosive. And let's take a listen to how those sound.
Plosives can be a persistent problem.
First thing I want to point out is with this specific issue with plosives, they create this very distinctive waveform pattern. You can see one where the cursor is at the moment and then a smaller one to the right. And when I was first starting in this business, we were told that if this happened, there was no fixing it. The only thing you could do was call the talent back in and re-record. And in the days of magnetic tape, that was largely true. But Cubase actually makes this a problem you can solve, and you can do it fairly easily, and we don't even have to go into the editor to do so. I'm going to take the split tool, and I'm going to place that. I'm going to turn off snap first of all. Place the split tool right at the beginning of that signature waveform there, and then I'm going to use the fade handle to just simply drag across that and try to minimize it as much as possible. And then I'm going to take the split tool and repeat that same exercise downstream. All right, switch to the arrow, use the fade handle. Oops. Just drag across that, again, that real pronounced S, sort of sideways S waveform. And let's take a listen to how that sounds.
Can be a persistent problem.
Okay, the second one's pretty good. There's still a little bit of thump to the first, so I'm going to squeeze him down just a little further. This has gone from something that was awful to something that's manageable.
A persistent problem.
Okay, the second one's real good. The first one's still a little pronounced. Let me overshoot these just to show you what happens if you go too far with this technique. It'll be kind of fadey.
Can be a persistent problem.
Okay, that's a little too much. It may take a couple of rounds of trial and error to get it right where you want it. But my point is something that historically mandated a retake can be solved, and you don't even have to open any special editing screens to do it. Just the basic tools right here in the project window can attack it. So let's move to the second case here, which is more of an editorial scenario. And we're going to open the lanes on this, and what we have here is a guitar part that's been repeated, presumably through cycle recording over and over again. And if you haven't dealt with the comp tool in lanes before, this is one of the handiest new features. You can select this comping tool and simply click and drag across the performance. And then after you've sliced this, and let me adjust that one, then you can simply go through and click on the ones that you want to hear. Okay, and these just have slightly different filters and EQs applied, but this is particularly useful if you have multiple vocal takes and you want to grab just the best articulations out of each one. Once you're done with that and you've got all the right ones picked out, you can undo or collapse the lanes feature, and it'll present itself as a single track. And if you're absolutely positive that that's what you want and want to avoid anything getting altered or changed, you can select all of these and you can glue them together, and they'll become one event. And if you really want to solidify this for all time, you select that again, come under the audio menu here and select the option to bounce, replace, and now it has collapsed those all into one seamless waveform. So if we move down to our first creative scenario here, this clip is just that same guitar riff again. But this time I'm going to double click it and we'll jump into the sample editor itself. One thing that I want to point out is you can select a section of audio within this clip, and then you can open the audio menu and apply any of these processes to just that section. And just as a for instance, something that'll be obvious to see here, if we come down and select reverse and proceed, it's going to flip that section around. And similarly, you can take just a subsection of a clip like this, drop into that same menu, and open up any of your plugins. And you can apply the processing from these plugins just to a small section of a waveform. So if we grab that and let's try the delay plugin and just do a mono delay here. And I don't, there should be enough room here to hear this, but we'll go ahead and proceed. See if we can hear that. Okay, so you hear a little bit of an echo there in just that section. Something else you can do within a clip like this is if you open the audio warp tab, select musical mode and free warp. Let's say this particular piece of audio has to remain at that specific length, but there's a timing glitch inside of it. Rather than trying to stretch the entire thing and change the length of the clip, you can come in free warp mode and you can grab just sections of it. And you'll notice that the beginning and the end points here are staying anchored. And you can just simply warp around within the waveform itself. So the next thing, this is a little more involved, is I want to look at this scenario called beat conversion. And what I have here is a patch from Halion Sonic SE. If we take a look here under the drums and percussion family, there's a subcategory of beats, and they have these 4 beats here, but they're really useful. You trigger them and you have a whole variety of things that you can play with just a single keystroke. But they're locked into, in this case, 120 beats per minute. Now you've got them all up and down the keyboards. There's individual drum sounds. It's actually a lot of fun to play around with. But it's only useful if your song is at 120 beats per minute. So the question is, how would I take this and change its timing so that I could use it with a project at another tempo? And there's really 2 ways to solve this problem. One is sort of coarse and crude, and the other one's a little more precise. We select this track and then open the Edit menu, select Render in Place, which is new with version 8, and hit Render. It's going to run basically a miniature export process and create an audio track from that right here. And what we have in the new track 4 is the audio playback from that MIDI sequence. And now that we have that converted to audio, we can come up and take the time stretch tool and you can squeeze it or you can stretch it. And that's very quick and easy. The only downside to doing it that way is if you slow it down a lot, you'll start to notice some sonic distortion. And the other thing is this is sort of freeform. There's no way to lock that to a tempo directly. So if we undo all that stretching, we have the option to go back to our normal tool, double click this guy, bring him into the sample editor and open the hit points tab. And we'll select edit hit points and then use the threshold bar here. So somewhere around there, it looks like it's picking up the little stuff. And once we have that set, we'll come down and create slices. All right, and now it's taken that piece of audio and it's generated a whole bunch of slices based on the location of those hit points. And as long as your track is in musical mode, now you get our transport bar up here. We can change our overall project tempo, slow it down to 112, for example. Or we can speed it up to 130. And those slices are going to follow right along. And what makes this a better way to do it is if you open the quantize panel here, all of these tools now, from your different resolutions to your swing modes and so forth, all of this is now available to go to work on those slices. But you can now lock that beat to a specific tempo. So if this audio loop is something you can't live without, there is a way to make that a different tempo and make it workable. Okay, so the last of these scenarios that I want to look at is called 2 solutions. And this is a selection of voiceover narration. And what I want to point out is 2 ways to solve the same problem. You sometimes have the issue of removing background noise. So when the narrator's not speaking, you may hear hum. Or if you were dealing with a microphone on, say, a tom for a drum kit, except for the moment when the tom is being played, the rest of the time it sits there and is picking up all the background chatter. So there are a couple of different ways you could go about reducing that. One would be in the signal path and the other would be at the source. So if we open the channel editor for this and we go to the strip, there's a noise gate you can activate. And as you would play this back simply. A noise gate's an automatic off control. So if the signal falls below a threshold, it just closes it all the way down to nothing. And so you'd start playback.
Combined Minds Media helps clients deploy instructional content that lets
and play with
do
the
what it does
threshold.
best, so the instructors can do what they do best.
And it's a little bit of a trial and error process, but you would get it to where the gate is closing at just the very end of the words or at the drum hits or whatever it is. And then you could leave your original waveform alone and let the noise gate close down the channel output anytime that the signal falls low enough, and you would get rid of all the intermediate background noise. Another way that you could solve that same problem is close off the noise gate. And let's again double click the waveform. Or actually, you know what? We don't even need to do that. Just select the waveform here, go under the audio menu again and select the advanced menu and the detect silence option. And here again, we've got some controls at the bottom. You're seeing the waveform at the top, and you would have to play around with the waveform amounts to get the setting just right. But once you have that setting accurate, this is sort of the equivalent of the playing around with the threshold tool on the noise gate. You'd hit process, and it's going to go through and slice that whole waveform up. And now where you see the pieces missing, what it did is determined that those were silent, and it sliced on either side of it and erased it. And the point there is that there really isn't a single right answer with any of the editing solutions, and I would encourage you to try solving stuff different ways, because it's going to lead to different results. I mean, in this particular case, just to review, you can open up the edit in place window, and not only will that show you all the notes, and you can come in and you can erase and move and all the rest of it. You can grab bunches of them and drag them around, stuff like that. You can open up the controller lanes at the bottom and directly edit things like your velocity and so forth. And if that doesn't give you enough granularity, close up the lanes and double click the performance, and now you'll open up the key editor. Okay, the color coding here is of course related to velocity. And if we drag this window up from the bottom here, adjust our scroll, we can make the velocity at the bottom a lot more obvious. But something that is easy to miss is if you click this plus symbol in the very lower left-hand corner, you can add additional controller lanes, and you can look at a variety of variables at the same time. And this is getting a little bit cluttered if I squeeze that back down. Now, I don't have any pitch bend data there, so we could actually go and draw some in, although this piano patch won't respond to it. And same for aftertouch. And you can see all those controllers lined up right on top of each other. Now, you may notice the two lines that I just drew were pretty chunky, and that's down to the fact that the grid in the background is set at a pretty large value. If we change that to something more discrete, like 128 steps, then the corresponding line is going to be a lot smoother. Okay, so the next thing I want to look at is the use of note expression as a creative tool. So if we take this random riff of audio here, and or MIDI data, and we open it up, let's just listen to the last few notes here. Assuming that you're connected to a plugin which can process note expression information, you can double click any of the notes, and you will see the MIDI controller laid right on top of it. And of course, this allows you to go in, and rather than adjusting the controller lane for the entire performance, you're doing it on a note-by-note basis. In this case, it's the emphasis parameter. And zoom in a little closer here. So there's you can see the value of the emphasis across the life of the note, and you can go in and use the handles around the picture frame here to adjust that. And you can also go in with the pencil tool and redraw it. Now, if you have other variables that you want to add, say panning, for example, select that over here in the under the note expression tab, select the one you want to work with, and then you can simply variables that are in effect are all going to show up here in the left-hand tab window with an asterisk at the front, and then you can come over here within the note expression window itself and adjust them. And again, the only catch to this is that as cool as this is, it's only going to work with a synthesizer module or a VST plugin that supports it. And within Cubase, if you open up the Halion Sonic SE user interface, and you come in here and search for this expression, note EX, um, you're going to see all of the note expression capable patches or sounds are appended with that note EXP nomenclature at the end of them. So any of these can be used with those different effects if you select something. Okay, so the last MIDI creative edit that I want to show you has to do with drums. And what we have here is a drum part from one of the Alan Morgan presets. I'll zoom back out here a little bit and play just a few measures of this. Okay, sounds very good. Everything's working. But the way this was created using a single plugin, the mixing of the different drum sounds is all going to be done here within Groove Agent SE. And that's not a bad thing, but that's not the way that everybody would prefer to work. And so what we're going to do is select the MIDI performance itself. It's not enough to just select the track. You have to click on the actual data block and then go under the MIDI menu, and we're going to select the option to dissolve part. And it's going to ask you, do you want to do that by channels or by pitches? And in this case, we want to do separate pitches because each drum sound is on a different pitched note. You can see that each one now bears the name of the drum sound that it contains. So the kick drum is in its own track, the hi-hat is on its own track, and so forth. And if we open the mixer, the mix console, use the G key to squeeze things together here, we have a lot more tracks than we did before. So in one sense, there's more work to be done because each individual drum's sound has to be dealt with on its own. A lot of folks that are used to mixing traditionally don't realize that you can take any MIDI part and dissolve it into individual pitches and lanes like that to give yourself more mixing flexibility later. And speaking of mixing, that's what we're going to get into in the next section, which we'll be back to in just a minute.